For thousands of years, the world was connected by this fragile network of ancient roads and really risky sea lanes. But in the 15th century, one single event snapped a critical link in that chain, and it set off a scramble that would not just remap our world, but completely redefine it. We're about to dive into that incredible moment in history.
So this is the big question, right? Why 1453? What on earth happened in that 1 year that forced an entire continent to look to the oceans and, in doing so, connect the entire globe in ways that no one could have possibly imagined?
To answer that, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start by looking at the world as it was. Then we'll pinpoint the moment it all just broke. We'll dig into the powerful forces pushing for a new solution, follow the incredible voyages that happened because of it, and finally, we're going to unpack the world-changing consequences and the really complex legacy they left behind.
All right, first up, to really get the shock of what was coming, you have to appreciate how stable the old world was. For centuries, trade between the East and the West was, well, it was a known thing. A difficult thing for sure, but a system that had basically worked for millennia.
You know, what's fascinating here is just the sheer timescale we're talking about. This wasn't some new fad. We've got evidence of trade all the way back to the Indus Valley civilization. Roman coins found in India prove there was this thriving connection. By the medieval ages, the Mediterranean was a commercial superhighway, and by the 15th century, land routes like the legendary Silk Road were the main arteries of global commerce, making the merchants who controlled them unbelievably rich.
But, and this is a big but, this whole system had some serious weaknesses. It was incredibly slow, it was dangerous, and it totally depended on the goodwill of the rulers whose lands these routes crossed. And that goodwill was about to run out.
I mean, just think about how tough it was to use these land routes. The journey took months, you were constantly in danger from robbers, there was hardly any proper lodging, you couldn't trade anything that would spoil, and here's the biggest flaw of all, a local ruler could just shut down the route anytime they wanted. Sea routes, on the other hand, they were a giant question mark, just brimming with unknown potential.
And this is the moment. 1453, the Ottoman Empire captures the city of Constantinople, the great crossroads between Europe and Asia. Just like that, the Turkish rulers slammed the door shut on the primary land route. The flow of all those eastern goods to Europe, it was choked off. So finding a new way to the east was no longer just a good idea for making a bigger profit, it became an absolute economic necessity. Survival, really.
So, with the old ways completely blocked, you get this perfect storm of motivation, money, and new tech. It all starts to build, creating this intense pressure that would literally push European explorers out onto the open ocean. Let's start with the most powerful motivator of all, money. I mean, when Vasco da Gama finally made it to India by sea, the spices and precious stones he brought back repaid the cost of the entire expedition 60 times over. 60! With that kind of potential payday, you can bet people were willing to risk absolutely everything.
And this desire, it wasn't new. It had been simmering for centuries. Fueled by stories like those from Marco Polo. His tales about the riches of the East, they weren't just travel stories. They were like investment pitches that fired up the imagination of an entire continent, making traders ready to take on almost any danger you could think of.
And what were they after? All this amazing stuff. Europe's wealthy class had this insatiable appetite for Chinese silk, Indian textiles, and especially spices. Spices weren't just for flavor, they were crucial for preserving food. This massive demand meant that whoever could find a direct route and cut out all the middlemen, well, they were going to make an absolute fortune. But desire isn't enough. You need the right tools for the job. And a few key innovations made the impossible, well, possible. The mariner's compass meant sailors could finally navigate without having to see land. The astrolabe let them figure out their latitude, how far north or south they were. And, so important, new ship designs like the caravel were coming out. They were strong but nimble, just perfect for handling the rough open ocean.
So beyond the tech and the money, there were three other huge drivers: gold, glory, and God. Monarchs wanted to fill their treasuries and grow their empires. Explorers, they wanted fame and political power. And the church saw a golden opportunity to spread Christianity to new parts of the world.
Okay, so the motivation is there, the money's there, and the tools are there. It was time for action. A handful of incredibly daring voyages would, in just a few decades, completely shatter the old map of the world.
This timeline just shows you how fast it all happened. It kicks off in 1488, when Bartholomew Dias proves you can sail around Africa. He calls its tip the Cape of Good Hope. Just 4 years later, Columbus, trying to find a shortcut to the east for Spain, bumps right into the Americas by a mistake. Then in 1498, Vasco da Gama builds on what Dias did and makes it all the way to India, finally opening that direct sea route. And then to top it all off, Magellan's expedition goes all the way around the globe, giving the first real proof that the world was round.
Now, these discoveries didn't just add some new lines to the map. Oh no, they triggered a tidal wave of change, creating a completely new global power structure with profound and often brutal consequences that we are still living with today. The shift in power was immediate, and it was seismic. The Atlantic became the new center of global trade, and cities like London and Lisbon just totally eclipsed the old hubs like Venice and Genoa. All this immense wealth flowing back from the colonies made European kings more powerful than ever. And this, right here, is the beginning of the age of colonialism, as European nations raced to claim territory and resources all across Asia, Africa, and the newly found Americas.
To justify all this expansion, an ideology started to take hold known as the white man's burden. It was a really powerful and frankly dangerous idea. This belief that Europeans were culturally superior and had some kind of moral duty to civilize the rest of the world. In practice, this was used to rationalize the systematic destruction of native cultures and force Western values on them.
The discoveries also kicked off what we call the Columbian Exchange. This was a massive transfer of plants, animals, and ideas between the old and new worlds. So Europeans brought things like cattle and horses to the Americas. In return, the old world got these game-changing crops like potatoes, tomatoes, and corn, which completely changed what people ate around the world. But it was also an exchange of diseases, which tragically wiped out huge portions of the indigenous populations in the Americas.
It's so important to understand that this new global system, it was not a partnership, not even close. It was designed from the ground up to be exploitative. Colonial powers would set up rules to make sure all the money and benefits flowed back to the mother country. They'd even forbid colonies from making their own goods just to get rid of competition and squeeze out as much wealth as possible. And this led to centuries of exploitation.
So as we pull back and look at the big picture, what's the ultimate legacy of this whole era? It's a world that is without a doubt connected, but one whose connections were forged in a fire of ambition, greed, and conquest.
Okay, so what are the key takeaways? First, none of this was an accident. It was the direct result of a crisis, the fall of Constantinople, colliding with a perfect storm of motivations. Second, this era created the very first truly global economy. But finally, and this is maybe the most important part, we have to recognize that this new global connection was built on a foundation of colonialism and exploitation, a legacy that absolutely continues to shape the world we live in right now.
Which leaves us with a final, really difficult question. When we look back at these figures, Columbus, da Gama, Magellan, how should we see them? Are they primarily heroic explorers who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge? Or are they the pioneers of an exploitative system that caused unbelievable suffering? The truth, as it usually is complicated. And it forces us to grapple with how one of history's greatest turning points was, at the exact same time, a moment of incredible discovery and profound destruction.